My starting point is that the crises that we face, there's something fundamentally similar about them. The climate and ecological emergency is a crisis that has occurred because over a very long time period indeed, we as a species have been reckless and careless. And we haven't run the world in a genuinely democratic way, which might have made it less likely that we were so reckless and careless. The situation in relation to the coronavirus is that over a somewhat shorter period, although actually still quite a long period if you look at it in the round, again, we've been reckless and careless. And the two crises are in fact directly connected. I mean, the ecological and climate crisis and the corona crisis, they're directly connected because we know with pretty good certainty that the coronavirus crisis originated because of habitat destruction, in this case in China. Habitat destruction which will have been probabilified by the worldwide globalized capitalist system as we know it. Which is a system which encourages countries and localities and companies and individuals to destroy their habitats for profit. We also know that pandemics such as this one are probabilified by climate damage, that as the temperature goes up, we get the likelihood of more and more of these pandemics. That is scientific knowledge. Furthermore, this pandemic has been spread at the enormous rate it's been spread by air travel. When you look back 100 years to the Spanish flu, that moved around the world rather more slowly. It went at the speed of a steamship. This has gone at the speed of a jet plane and has made it far more difficult to deal with. So recklessness has set up the situation whereby the coronavirus pandemic could happen in the first place. It was then reckless and unprecautious not to seek to change that situation. So for example, the kind of thing we should have done is overnight massively clamp down on air travel. The countries which have done that, such as for example, New Zealand, have remained almost coronavirus free. What we've seen in this coronavirus crisis is a sort of telescoped version of the thing that we've seen over a much longer time period with the climate and ecological emergency. And as I say, the two are actually directly interrelated. We've seen some governments and some peoples acting relatively precautiously, relatively carefully. And those have been the ones that have come out better in this crisis so far. And we've seen others, such as the US government and the UK government, act extremely recklessly. And those have been the ones that are suffering so far. Now, if we can learn those lessons and apply them to stopping future pandemics, and apply them to other crises, such as the climate and ecological emergency, then we'll be in much stronger shape. So that's why it seems to me that this principle, the precautionary principle of looking before you leap, of not damaging stuff that is essential to us unless you've got a very, very good reason to do so, of not waiting till all the evidence is in to protect ourselves against potential threats, because by the time all the evidence is in, it could be too late. It seems to me that the precautionary principle sets us up extremely well for thinking about these crises together. And it is the kind of principle that therefore obviously informs Extinction Rebellion's ideas, such as our second demand of a very ambitious timescale for reducing habitat damage and climate damage. And it's a principle which should inform the deliberations of any citizens' assembly. So in Extinction Rebellion, of course, we believe in citizens' assemblies. We think that the kind of stuff that Mel was talking about is the way we need to go if, as societies and as the world, we're going to adequately address the kind of crisis, the kind of emergency that we're in. But now the question which might get asked at this point is, okay, the climate and ecological emergency is a relatively slow running emergency. It's absolutely deadly, but it moves at the speed of years, decades, centuries. The coronavirus crisis moves at the speed of months, weeks, days. Have we got time in the context of this crisis to make deliberative assemblies in any way relevant? And my answer to that is yes. And the reason is this. Well, in fact, there are lots of answers to this question. One answer to the question would be actually, in terms of the way that the coronavirus crisis should be addressed by deliberative democracy, it should be primarily in terms of how we emerge from this crisis. And that is something which we have a little bit more time to deal with, because this crisis is not going to be over, I'm sorry to have to tell you, in the next few weeks or even months. It's probably going to be with us for years, and certainly its effects are going to be with us for years. So what I want to urge is that at this moment, we need to be bending our minds and bending our attention and bending our movements to pressing the case for deliberative democracy as the way we should decide how to come out of this crisis, how we build back better, how we ensure that there is no going back to the old unsustainable normal. Because let's be very clear about this. This crisis is probably our last chance. It's probably our last chance to adequately address the climate and ecological emergency, probably our last chance even to adapt to the climate damage and ecological damage that is already there and is already baked in for the coming years. So I'm not saying that if we get this right, everything's going to be fine. No, everything is not going to be fine. It's not going to be fine anywhere. It's certainly not going to be fine in Africa, but it's not going to be fine anywhere. What I'm saying is that this is our last chance to come through with some kind of salvageable civilization and to get anywhere near the demands and hopes and aspirations that we have. Another answer to the question of have we got time would be this. People might be worrying, can we do this? Because by the time this crisis is really over, well, then it'll be too late. And in the meantime, we can't have gatherings, we've got to have physical distancing, etc. So let me give a sort of outline practical answer to that question, as Mel trailed earlier. There are ways of doing this. We could have citizens' assemblies with physical distancing, or we could do them online. The French Climate Assembly moved online. The British Climate Assembly moved recently online. It's not beyond the wit of man and woman to do this if it's important, and it is very, very important. Another answer to the question of have we got time is, well, look, if it's really crucial, and it is really crucial, we can, if necessary, telescope these processes. They don't have to take months. You could do them in days, you could do them even in a day. Iceland famously did so some years ago to try to resolve where to go after the financial crisis and its terrible version of that with its banks all collapsing. Or there's this gentleman, the major deliberative democracy theorist, James Fishkin, whose books I would recommend. He famously argued that you could have a deliberative democratic process that took just half a day, which would immeasurably improve, for example, presidential election processes. On the morning of an election, you could have people get together for a few hours and work through the issues, and that would immeasurably improve the outcome. And I think he's almost certainly right. Now, look, I'm not saying that it's credible that you could have an assembly to decide how you come out of the coronavirus crisis in the best possible way that took just a few hours. What I am saying, though, is that there are ways of dramatically telescoping these processes if we are determined to have these processes and if we are clear on the importance and salience of them to the situation that we're in. And I think we should be so clear. So to try to sum up my remarks, we have been extremely reckless, which is why we are in the long climate and ecological emergency. We have been in some respects reckless, which is why we're in the short coronavirus emergency. Some of us have been less reckless than others, and we can and should learn from that. We should seek to be precautious in the long run to get out of these combined crises. In particular, it would be an absolute catastrophe if we jumped from the frying pan of the coronavirus crisis to the fires of climate breakdown. We have to build back better. We have to reset in ways that are compatible with us and our children having a future, and especially in the parts of the world that are the most vulnerable to the climate and ecological emergency. And we can do this. And crucial to the way that we can do it is by insisting upon deliberative democratic processes to enable us to do this. So if I've got one plug and one plea, it is please at the local level, at the national level, at the international, and indeed at the global level, let us be pressing now for citizens' assemblies to chart the way out of the coronavirus crisis wisely, a way out of that crisis which will be good for people and planet and that will not worsen the underlying and ultimately far more serious climate and ecological emergency. I think we can do this. I think we can press now for a global citizens' assembly. And as I say, at every level, global, national, local, this is something which movements such as Extinction Rebellion can, and I passionately believe, should be pushing for at this moment as our best hope in this scenario, which, as I say, I believe is almost certainly our last chance to salvage human civilization. Those are my remarks. Thank you.